All right, everybody. So welcome to the Challenging Conversations Education Series. I'm Trisha Burke, and I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see my presentation. There's a couple people still rolling in, so I'm taking it kind of slow in the beginning here. All right. Can everyone see the presentation okay? I can no longer see the chat, so, oh, here, let me pull it up. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so as I said, this is the Wellness Education Series on Difficult Conversations, and I'm Trisha Burke. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication Studies. And so I do a little bit of research on difficult conversations. I have difficult conversations, as I'm sure all of you do, and I'm here to talk to you about this today. I'm also a member of the WellCats leadership team, and I have been for a few years. So I also understand how to talk about this from a wellness perspective at Texas State and talk a little bit more about the program, which, as you all probably know by now, is a wellness program that we have here at Texas State, free for everyone who's a benefits eligible employee. And we have presentations like this, group exercise classes, nutrition classes, health coaching, all of those kinds of things. And if you have questions, you can always email Wellcats and we'll be happy to help you answer your questions. Okay, so some common topics that are difficult to discuss include things like division of labor in your household, finances, we know that can be a problem, health behaviors, like if someone is not doing something that they should be doing, or if they're not exercising when they should be, if they're smoking when they shouldn't be, if they're drinking too much, if they should be going to get a health screening that they're not getting. So all of those kinds of conversations, trust in relationships, expectations that we have for each other, parenting, and politics, which is especially relevant at the current time that we're going through the election season. So all of these are difficult topics to discuss according to the literature, according to people's experiences. And I'm curious if any of you have other topics that you would want to add to this list that you think are difficult to discuss in your own relationships or in the workplace, and anything that you feel like I've overlooked here in terms of coming up with difficult topics. And while you guys think about that, you could put them in the chat or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself either way. I'll apologize. I was sick last week, and so my voice is not all the way back yet, but I'm doing my best today to hopefully you can hear me okay. All right, so I don't see career opportunities, negotiating career opportunities. That's a good example. So I assume that means like wanting to do more in the organization or maybe switch departments and trying to do that in a way that is not threatening to your current department or your current supervisor or colleagues. So that can certainly be a challenge as well. Um, I know like last weekend, my husband has a different approach to parenting than I do. So we have two little kids, and he said something to them that I didn't really like. And I was like, listen, man, you can't talk to our kids like that. And if you don't have the resources to be able to talk to them in the way that I want you to, then you need to go find those resources. If you can't hear me, then you need to find someone else that you can hear, right? And so I think that is one approach that you might take is talking about the conversations yourself or referring people to um, others who might be able to help them. And that could be true for any of these topics: division of labor, finances, health behaviors. When it comes to career opportunities, maybe you have another person in the organization that you think you might talk to first. So all of these are important topics to discuss, and you could think about how you can talk about them in a way that's strategic and that's not threatening to the other person. So I'll focus a little bit on the political conversation just because I know this is one that has been happening all around and is causing some tension in relationships because of how people have different opinions than their partners or their children or their parents or their siblings or whatever it might be. And right now, where everything is very heightened and tense, I think this is one good thing to showcase. So these articles that I highlighted here, the PBS NewsHour article and the other one, this politics article from Slate, these are excerpts from each of those. So from the PBS article, they said, I think that politics weren't discussed as intensely, at least in my experience, before the 2016 election. Like, I think that I knew he was a Republican. She's talking about her husband, and I was a Democrat. I had no idea that these are some of the beliefs that he had, and that's very hard to stomach. And so some of you might have had situations in your relationships where maybe you weren't talking about politics as much, and then now people are, and you're learning things about your friends and family members that are kind of surprising. um, Another person said from the Slate article, Jesus himself would have to come down for me to vote for Joe Biden. Shannon's mom told her on a recent phone call. Growing up in a conservative household, Shannon understands her parents' support for Donald Trump, but since she no longer agrees with their politics, she finds it impossible to have a pleasant conversation with them. So in some cases, you can see that it's really causing a lot of discord in families where they're having a hard time even finding common ground or finding a conversation, something to talk about that isn't loaded and that isn't causing stress in conversations. And so you might have this experience as well. Because we're talking about this in a workplace, wanted to highlight some other difficult conversations at work that come from some research that I did with my colleague Kristen Ferris. And we were looking at people talking with their colleagues about wellness at Texas State and about wanting to use their wellness time or their leave time. And so when we did some focus groups, these are some of the quotes that people had when it came to discussing wellness and discussing leave in the workplace. So with regard to wellness time, one employee said, my first boss wouldn't approve my wellness time and gave me a ton more work right before I wanted to take it. My second boss encouraged us all to take the wellness time and said we needed the break. She was much more positive. We were all happier than the folks at my first job. She also would get mad at us if we were checking emails on vacation or when we were sick. So that person is talking about different experiences and departments and how one was kind of a difficult environment to bring up these conversations and the other was more open. And the other person, with regard to workload and leave, said, I was so nervous about having my baby and felt so guilty for not being there to do the work. My coworkers complained openly before the baby was born about how much work they would have to do when I was gone. I was emailing between contractions and kept working the entire leave. I basically just worked from home for my maternity leave. Um, so as someone who also did that, I can understand, I can empathize with how much work that is and how hard it is to manage those different skills. And when you're in a position where you feel like your responsibilities are so elevated in these different areas of your life, it might be tough to balance and it might be hard to have these conversations with your supervisors. So these are some more examples of where you might have some difficult conversations in the workplace. I'm sure all of you have other examples about this as well that aren't even related to wellness time. It could be related to a division of labor at work. It could be related to feeling like you're not getting opportunities that you should be getting. It could be related to um, just generally like a culture that you have in your office. So those are some examples. And I want to know from you all, what makes discussions difficult? Like, why is it so hard to have these difficult conversations? This infographic kind of shows one example about dealing with conflict and how obviously the maze is a lot easier to get through when you're having the conversation in person or over video call. Over email, it gets more complicated than saying it's fine when it's not. Obviously, that's the avoidance strategy is not something that is very helpful to deal with conflict. So we have to address the conflict and we have to address the difficult conversations. But I'm wondering, what is it that is making these conversations difficult when we want to have them? What are some things that we're thinking about when it comes to approaching other people about the topics that we want to discuss with them? So, one thing might be a power difference. Um, Another thing might be that you are worried about your relationship and the consequences of talking about the conversation. Do you guys have any more examples? Fear of preempting the reaction of the said person, so how the other person's going to react and how you're going to handle their reaction. So that can be one thing that's challenging for sure. What else do you guys think are some things that make these conversations difficult? Maybe you feel like you've had the conversation before and the other person has been ignoring you or not responding to you. Maybe you feel like you don't have the words to have the conversation. You don't really know how to approach it. Maybe you're concerned about coming off in a negative way to the other person or making them feel like they need to be defensive or like you're criticizing them. So these are just some examples. I'd like to see some more examples from the group here about what makes these discussions difficult to approach. Why are they characterized as difficult conversations? Do you have any more examples of what's making them so difficult? Okay, well, I've given a few. There's one in the chat. If anyone else wants to include some more in the chat, I'll be happy to circle back to those. But I think basically it's the fear of having a conflict or having something blow up um, into a bigger issue than you intended for it to be in the first place. And so that can be in terms of fallout for your relationship, fallout for your employment, fallout for your day-to-day routines. So all of those things, you're concerned about the consequences. I'm also wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what, besides having a conversation face to face, might make these discussions easier. So, what are some things that you've been able to find? Yes, your message might not be heard due to their reaction. That's right. So, that's another thing that can be difficult about having these conversations, where you're worried about their reaction and they're just really not hearing you and how things are going to transpire because of the conversation. Um, and it's hard because those qualities of the difficult conversation are things that are kind of out of your control, right? Like you can't control their reaction, but you can present your message in a way that hopefully doesn't activate a feeling of defensiveness that is, consistent with a reaction we might be concerned about. Excuse me. So so what in your experience makes these discussions easier when you're ready to have a difficult conversation with someone, when you want to sit down and talk to them about an issue that's been bothering you, if it's about your partner not picking up their load in the household, if it's about your coworker turning in projects late all the time, um, what are some things that make these discussions a little bit easier when you decide to have them? What are some things you've noticed help you have these conversations and help you facilitate the conversations well? Yeah, go ahead.
Um, just something I've seen other people do is they
Mhm.
just, when it's time to sit down and have the conversation, they just lead with, this is going to be a really difficult conversation. And then it just
Yeah.
kind of like puts it out there and acknowledges it and like no dancing around it. That I feel like has really helped kind of just set the stage right from the beginning.
Yeah, being honest about the conversation that it's going to be difficult so everyone kind of understands from the beginning that you are trying to approach this in a respectful and honest way from the very beginning. And that you both are prepared to listen, because if it's going to be difficult, that means that you need to be um, engaged and focused and listening and trying to reduce your level of ego involvement when it comes to the conversation and just having the conversation. Has anyone else noticed anything else? Okay, so we have a couple more in the chat. Let's see. Sorry again about my voice. Okay, so do it when people are calm and not emotional. Yes, this is a very good example. Um, I hate to equate our coworkers to my young children, my toddlers, but sometimes it can feel that way. Um, so when my kids are melting down and freaking out, my 2-year-old is melting down and freaking out, it doesn't help to have a rational conversation with him at that time, right? Like we have to wait for him to calm down before we can talk to him. So it's kind of the same thing at work. If people are really upset and fired up and yelling, like you have to wait for some of that to blow over before you can actually have the conversation. And Nikki says the other person opening up the conversation first about perhaps an issue they might have with you. For example, a significant other annoyed about dishes opens up the conversation for you to voice your frustration at a lack of effort with laundry, etc. Okay, this is a good example because it's opening the door for people to be open with each other. But I will say that if you bring up one issue and then your partner brings up another issue, sometimes it seems like you're just going back and forth and criticizing each other for different things. So you have to do this very artfully. Like if they're going to bring up the conversation to you first, okay, but then you need to really listen to them and hear them and tell them, I understand, I'm sorry that bothers you, I'm going to try to do a better job. And while we're talking about this, it also kind of bothers me when you maybe don't help with the laundry, because that would help me out and maybe I'd have more time to help with the dishes if we could be more equal on that score, right? Because then it doesn't seem like a tit for tat. So as long as you're bringing it up in a helpful way where you're listening to them, acknowledging them, validating it, and then bringing it up in a very non-threatening way that you want to talk about something related, then that can open the door to a really good conversation, as long as it doesn't kind of like cascade into each person blaming each other for different things. Um, the sandwich approach, so something positive, the negative or hard, and close with something positive. Yes, this is a great way to do things. I do this with my students a lot too. So I can see that you've been trying really hard, but this assignment didn't quite meet my standards because you missed this and this and this. But I know that you're dedicated and you're learning, and I'm really proud of the progress you've made, right? So that's like the positive, the what they need to work on, and then the positive again. I think that is great because, especially if it comes across as very honest, you're validating their efforts. Having a neutral environment is helpful. And I think also, I'm not exactly sure what neutral means, but in this context, but maybe like an environment without a lot of extra stimuli around you, like not a very noisy environment, um, and an environment where you can easily focus on each other and have a conversation is really helpful. Making a list of questions that can address the issue but using questions can keep it from sounding accusatory. Like, is there something I can do to help you remember to take out the trash? Yeah, so this is a good example of how you can try to ask people how you can help facilitate the behavior that you want them to engage in. And it doesn't sound so much like a criticism as like you want to approach it from the philosophy of being a team and working together to try to achieve these things. So all of these are really good examples. I think if we can be in an environment without a lot of stimuli, if we can try to focus on make sure that we're integrating the positive along with some of the difficult things to discuss. And if we're open to hearing other people when we're not emotional and when we're trying to have an honest conversation and working together as a team and trying to listen to each other and approach it from the perspective of being a team. And so, again, these can apply in your personal life, and this can apply in the workplace where you're showing a general respect for the other person. So, all of those things can make the discussions easier. I'm also going to then outline some more steps in the next couple of slides that hopefully will help make the conversations easier as well. Okay, so where to begin? So before we had someone mention that it helps to talk about the fact that it's going to be a difficult conversation from the beginning and that we want to be honest about that. That's really good. I think another good place to begin is just to start with the fact that your relationship means something to you. You care about each other, you respect each other, you want to understand each other, you want to be on the same team, and you can find and highlight common ground. And so you might say something like, if you're talking to a coworker, for example, I am so grateful that I have you as a coworker, and I know I need to talk about something that's difficult with you, but I really want you to understand how much I value you and how important you are to the workplace and to the work that we're trying to achieve here. And I know we both struggle with um, these issues from time to time, and I know that I'm not perfect and that there's ways that I can improve too. And I just want to have this conversation with you. And so you're starting with the relationship and you're finding or highlighting common ground in the sense that nobody's perfect. Everyone has to overcome challenges. Everyone has to work to make the situation better. Um, you might also do this in throughout the conversation when you find ways that you can identify with the person and what they're trying to communicate, or when you might want to like lighten up the conversation and interject some humor or something like that when you're having a difficult conversation. The next thing that's really helpful is preparing for the conversation. So, of course, because I teach communication and we're always telling our students to practice their messages before they present them so that they are credible and polished and professional. It goes the same way even in your personal relationships and in your relationships at work, where it helps so much to prepare ahead of time and to make notes. So, like Tracy said, make a list of questions. That's one way that you can prepare for the conversation. I think a really good thing from the very beginning is to figure out what your goal is or what your goals are. Are you trying to change their attitude? Are you trying to change their behavior? Are you just trying to raise their awareness about something? Like you have to figure out what exactly your goal is because that goal is the thing that should shape all the rest of your messages. And then when you find yourself kind of coming away from achieving that goal, like bringing up other issues that are unrelated, you can table things that are not related and make sure you circle back to focus on the goal that you want to really drive home. I think it's important in terms of a goal to recognize that you can't really change the other person. You can't change who they are, and you can't change necessarily the way that they respond to things, but you can just try to bring up the issues and talk about them in a way that they can hear them. And so you do have to think about maybe you have to take perspective and think about how you'd want someone to deliver a message to you when you're trying to communicate your message. And then think about how you can phrase a message in a way that the other person can actually hear it, where they don't feel attacked, where they don't feel like you're blaming them, where they don't feel like you're criticizing them, where they don't feel like you're undermining them. So, any of those behaviors where they feel like you're just offloading a list of complaints, or like you're not being respectful of them, or you're raising your voice with them, or you're only half listening to them, like none of those things will go over well. So, you have to consider how to communicate the message so they can hear it. And maybe you think in advance about something that they really enjoy and how to make the message relate to something that they enjoy. So if you have a coworker who's really into football, maybe you talk about teamwork and you use a football analogy so that they can understand that you're trying to relate to them and you're trying to understand their philosophy and their perspective too. And like someone else mentioned on here, having a neutral environment. So consider the time, the setting, and environment. Having a difficult conversation at the end of the day in a busy hallway, in an elevator, in a loud restaurant, like none of these are good places to have a conversation with someone that's a difficult conversation. You have to set aside time and you have to make sure you're in an environment where people feel like they can focus and pay attention and be heard. The other thing that's important, I think, is to consider your own role and responsibility. So perhaps you're having a conversation with a fellow colleague at work who didn't turn in assignments on, or doesn't usually turn assignments in on time, or is having a hard time. Well, if you're their supervisor, maybe you play a role in this, or you have some responsibility in this because you were expecting them to do something that they didn't understand they were supposed to do, or the deadlines weren't communicated clearly to them, or everything moves pretty fast around here lately. Maybe they're just having a hard time keeping up, right? So I think considering your own role and responsibility and not making the whole thing be on them really helps in acknowledging, I know I could do a better job of X, Y, and Z, but I still need you to try to focus on making this change or whatever it is. And then considering how to express your feelings without attacking or blaming the other person. So telling them, I feel like when you walk away during our conflict, it's hurtful to me because I don't feel like you're listening, versus, sorry guys, versus you never listen to me, you're always walking away, whatever. So the first message is a lot more measured and focused how you're feeling about it and what the results of that behavior is, versus the second message is just critiquing and blaming, which can lead to defensiveness and more criticism and is not always very productive. I'm going to pause for a second. Sorry. Oh man, I don't know if you guys have little kids like I do, but they just bring home germs all the time. I'm always sick. Okay, so the next one is be an active and compassionate listener. So be open, face the speaker, make eye contact with them. This is a big one, especially with everyone and how much they love their technology. Don't check your cell phone. Don't check your email. Don't check your smartwatch. Don't look at any of those things. Just talk to the other person and have a conversation with them. Make eye contact with them. Don't be doing chores while you're having the conversation. Don't be doing other things. Try to focus and um, make your body language in a position that's open to hearing their messages as well, because we often reflect back the body language that other people are communicating. And if we're sitting with our arms crossed and a big scowl on our face, then that's not really open to having a productive conversation. And so consider how you're presenting yourself as well. And hopefully, if you can present yourself as open and available to hear the messages, then they will be the same for the other person. Be attentive. So actually listen to the messages that they're communicating and don't interrupt them and don't plan what to say next. If you're listening to them, if you're hearing them and the whole time you're hearing them, you're just planning how you're going to um, have a rebuttal for their statement, you're not really listening to them. You're not really internalizing the message that they're sending. And so when you're having a difficult conversation, it's just as important to be a good listener in delivering your message as it is to deliver your message. Because if you're delivering your message and then you're not listening to their responses, the conversation is not going to unfold in a productive way. Be non-judgmental and don't jump to conclusions or impose your own opinions or solutions. So there might not be one there might not be one right answer. Maybe you can come up with an answer or a solution together, and don't jump to conclusions about their behavior. So try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the fact that they never take out the trash isn't because they don't care about you and they're not being respectful or because they're lazy. Maybe it's because they just simply have a hard time remembering and all they need is for you to like put a reminder on the fridge for them or something. Or you can come up with a good option for your family. Or maybe they're maybe the way that they're communicating with you, if they seem like they're having a hard time expressing their messages, or if they're a little bit angry, it might not be that they're having a hard time with you. It could be they had a really bad day at work. And so they're having a hard time having another conversation. So all this is to say is try to be as attentive and open and non-judgmental as possible, and try to limit these inclinations to jump to conclusions or to only suggest that there's one right way to do things, because there are lots of right ways to do things. And be compassionate and empathic. So really think about the other person and what their experience is too. When we were studying the workplace culture of health, we found that there were some things that could help with building a positive culture of support in the workplace that makes it easier to have these difficult conversations when this is kind of an underlying culture that goes on in the organization. And that's true of your friendships and your family relationships as well. Trying to have this underlying culture of support that goes on, because when you have that foundation, bringing up difficult topics seems like it's coming from a place of support instead of coming from a place of criticism, right? So, from supervisors and employees, it's helpful to enact supportive communication. Emotional support is a key here, and this is where you're being empathic and passionate. Basically, you're expressing that you care about the other person, you respect the other person, they're important to you, you value them. And this counteracts employees feeling invalidated or dismissed or ignored, which can happen when they don't have this type of support. So I think about this as like, okay, when I was a little kid and I was playing soccer, and the very first time that the ball comes and hits you in the chest and you like get the wind knocked out of you and you think you can't breathe and you're dying and you're 5 and you don't know any better. So that happened to me when I was a kid and I was like, oh my God, I can't breathe. I was freaking out. And this is how my dad responded. He was like, suck it up, right? So, like, that's not emotional support, that's emotion dismissing, right? Behavior. And so, whenever you have a culture of suck it up and emotion dismissing behaviors, it makes it a lot harder for people to feel validated. It makes it so they feel ignored. It makes it so they feel like they're not good enough. They're not allowed to express the way they feel. And that's very counterproductive. So, being emotionally supportive, making people feel validated is goes a long way in having a culture of support in the workplace and at home that makes it easier to bring up these conversations. Informational support is also helpful. So sharing resources with each other that are relevant. This was particular to the culture of health, but where people appreciated colleagues and particularly supervisors sharing resources about WellCats and wellness leave because it made them feel like they were able to take that time. But I think this goes beyond that and can be other resources in the workplace that are helpful. Like maybe you made this spreadsheet that made your job a lot easier. And so you share it with your colleague because you think they'll benefit from having it too. Or maybe your colleague's having a tough time with your supervisor and you say, yeah, they can be kind of tough, but I talked to them the other day about a problem I was having, and here's the approach I took. Maybe that will help you and talking to them too. So there's lots of ways to deliver and communicate informational support that are not just about sharing information about wildcats, although that's wonderful. And of course, you should always do that. Um, and using confirming messages. So, in general, it's helpful to reinforce the positive things people are doing in the workplace, to congratulate them for their hard work and things that they achieve, to encourage, this was specifically again to wellness, but encourage wellness participation because that can be a good stress relief for employees and creating a community around wellness. So just being very confirming and reinforcing those things. And so when it comes to your personal relationships, it might be that you've noticed someone in your family making progress on something and you want to reinforce and congratulate them for those behaviors and the progress that you've noticed. Um, like gave you the example of my husband and how I didn't like how he was talking to one of our kids a couple weeks ago. And last night, our son was being super difficult because he's super difficult. And my husband was way more patient than me. And he sat him down and he talked to him about what was going on. And he used very kind and confirming language. And so later I said, "Hey, I noticed how you were talking to Charlie, and I thought that was really great. And he seemed to really respond to the way that you were talking to him and how you were explaining the challenge we were having. And I'm really glad that you did that. That was awesome to see." And so I think that made him feel recognized for his efforts that he was trying. And that the conversation that he had, even though it took a lot more cognitive effort than like yelling really fast, it also, like, the environment was so much more peaceful and we could see the benefits of that taking place. So I think reinforcing those things when you see them is super helpful and continues to build this culture of support. Okay, so that's really all I had for you guys today on difficult conversations. But we have lots of time if anyone has questions about how to approach something in particular in the workplace or in your family or in your romantic relationships or friendships or whatever it might be. I'm happy to try to help unpack some of those things if you have questions.
I guess I don't have a specific question, but I guess I kind of throw something out there and just kind of pick your brain on it.
Okay.
I'm non-tenure line faculty on the non-tenure line faculty committee. And so at the university now with the faculty of instruction line and with all the different tracks that we have, the clinical track, professor of practice, all that, I know that non-tenure line faculty are having difficult conversations within their departments um, about their roles in, in this new faculty of instruction line, with inclusion on personnel committees and things like that. So, as a whole, that group of our university is struggling to have difficult conversations. And, I liked your first slide in that, you address like power differences and division of labor and all that. So this has been really helpful. Um, and so, I'm just trying to come here to see if there's anything I can bring back to the non-tenure line faculty as we discuss these issues in how to have these conversations at like our department and our college level. So again, I don't have like a specific question, but I kind of just wanted to throw that out there and to see if you had any comments maybe that I'm not thinking of
Yeah,
that could be
no,
helpful.
I think that's a good point to raise. And I'm thinking about our own department and our own faculty and how we've been having those conversations as well. Um, we made a concerted effort in the department to make um, clear and specific requirements for the different levels of faculty of instruction to try to make some of that stuff clearer to them, and to involve people in the discussion. And so I think like one of the things on the slide was expectations, right? And so
Mhm.
setting clear expectations and making sure that everyone's aware of the policies in place and where to find them and what the expectations are, and when there's not clarity, to ask for clarity. And I think even to ask for some level of involvement in the process of understanding how the expectations are being designed and set, because it doesn't also seem fair for people who are not in that role to be setting all of the expectations, right? And so I think that is maybe a conversation that people can have, um, where you talk about the fact that the people who are in the role of faculty of instruction have a different experience from people who are on the tenure track, right?
Mhm.
And so it's would be helpful to have some insight into the process, or at least conversation with the tenure track personnel committee, about the expectations, given that they don't have a shared experience in some sense. I don't know if I'm
Mhm.
answering your question or not,
Okay.
but
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have a specific
yeah,
question in mind, but
yeah,
yeah, I guess, and maybe as the non-tenure line faculty continue to meet this semester, I may reach back out to you if that's okay. Like if we
yeah.
have, a specific specific help with different scenarios on how non-tenure line faculty can approach conversations.
I think I'm happy to do any sort of like workshopping that I can. The other thing that I would mention is that we have ombuds people,
Right. Mhm.
who their whole job is to do this too, and they've been trained in all these conflict and mediation things. So they could also help people approach these conversations, and that could be a good resource for them.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. That's very helpful. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so there's another question in the chat about how do you handle situations where you're never going to agree on the other person's perspective? You agree to disagree, but the disagreement keeps happening. I know this is so tricky, isn't it? This is the hardest thing. I think in this instance, you have to find, it goes back to this idea of um, highlighting common ground. And I'm not in the right slide thing. Okay. This, where did you go? Here, finding or highlighting common ground. So the first thing is, again, starting with the fact that this is an important relationship to you. You care about this relationship. Um, you respect each other. You want to understand each other. You want to find common ground. And if the disagreement keeps happening and the person is not receptive to the message, or there's just not something that's going to change, it's really tricky. You have to just try to find another area, I think, of agreement. So I'll use my parents as an example. My parents are these people who have completely different political ideologies, and they live in the house by themselves, and they have a hard time like one person's in one room listening to one news channel and the other person's in the other room listening to the other news channel, and then they come together to eat dinner and they have a hard time finding topics to discuss that don't like set one of them off. And so they've had to try to find some other areas to focus on, and where they feel like they have some common ground. And I think that's been helpful to them, is to try to reduce some of the tension as they focus on the positives, on the common ground. But I guess in the situations where you're never going to understand their perspective and you agree to disagree, if you are in a position where you feel like it's best for you to distance yourself from the person, you can distance yourself from them. If you feel like that's not something that you can do, then you just have to prioritize and value your relationship and find some common ground. And potentially you could find a third party to help you mediate the discussion, so that maybe you could help each other understand your perspectives a little bit better. Because if this is a topic you've been talking about over and over again and you haven't been able to make any headway or resolution, it seems like you're having a hard time hearing each other or translating the message. And maybe a third party mediator would help you translate the message more effectively. And if not, then you just have to keep doing your best and finding areas of respect and agreement. And for Nikki's, I definitely got the people pleaser trait. And so I find it hard to bring up issues that I might have. I'm absolutely guilty of saying it's fine when it's not. I know that certainly for personal relationships, people in my life find this to be troubling, as it takes a lot of effort for them to try and get to the bottom of a problem I might have because I feel like I'm complaining when I bring issues up. Do you have any suggestions you could provide to try and combat that? Okay, this is a great question. And I am glad that you raised this question. I think for you, when it comes to being a people pleaser, it is important to understand that when you say something's fine and you avoid the conversation, it's not actually it's not actually helping the other person or the relationship because the issue's still there and it's going to come up again later. So all you're doing is like avoiding it and pressing pause, and then it's going to continue to grow until at some point it has to be addressed. And people, if they care about you, and it sounds like they do, and they want to get to the bottom of the problem, um, if they care about you, they want to make things better. And if they're asking you to tell them how to make things better, then it's not complaining to them, especially if you are saying that this relationship matters to you. And if you're saying things like, um, you have a role and responsibility in this situation as well. And if you can express your messages without attacking or blaming the other person, then it's not complaining, it's just having a conversation. So I think thinking about it as having a conversation and not as blaming or attacking or complaining is a really positive reframe. Um, and it's like that phrase, like, want to let me help you, right? That's like what your family members are trying to say, or whomever. Like they want you to tell them what's going on so they can fix it. So you should tell them what's going on so they can fix it. Let me help you. And um, I think just realizing that saying it's fine actually isn't a people pleasing strategy because they know that it's not fine. And so then they know something's wrong and they don't feel good about it. And when they know something's wrong and they don't feel good about it, they are going to still feel tension there. And you haven't gotten your issue resolved either. So really no one's happy in that circumstance. So it's like the opposite of people pleasing because you're not happy because you didn't bring it up and they're not happy because they know something's still bothering you. So everyone's kind of tense about it versus if you say, I do actually want to talk about this. And if it's not a good time to talk about it, I'm sorry, right then maybe you can say, let's talk about it tomorrow or let's talk about it later. But it's important to not just avoid it and um, because it's really not a people pleasing tactic. It's much better for the other person and yourself and your relationship if you bring it up in a productive um, in a productive way. I don't know if that helps or not, but I think just reframing it as explaining and discussing and having a conversation and not complaining. It doesn't have to be complaining. And considering the way that you factor into it too, and considering how not communicating that message is actually worse for everybody because everyone feels kind of bummed about it. Okay. Are there any other examples or questions or thoughts that anyone wants to share. I really appreciate all of you coming and asking these thoughtful questions. I'm so impressed by the questions that you have and um, your willingness to share them with us. Thank you. Nikki has another question. Okay. Okay. I was actually going to have a tricky conversation this afternoon, but yeah, sure. You can email me, Nikki, and I'll be happy to help you with um, having a like the tricky conversation and some pointers. Um, you can email me there, or you can like chat me on Teams or whatever. I don't care. I'll pull it up if you want to do that. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to help, and I'm happy to be a resource for you whenever it would be helpful to you. Or like I mentioned before, we have faculty ombuds people who have been trained and they go through, or not faculty, sorry, they're just university ombuds people, and they go through a lot of conflict and mediation training to do this very particular thing of helping people navigate difficult conversations at the university. Um, so I think they would also be willing and able to help you all address any of these conversations as they come up. And I'm happy to help out when I can. So feel free to reach out anytime. Okay, thank you everybody so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday and an excellent weekend. Thank you.